Welcome to our premiere education screening for the movie Selma.
Some might think, what does the United Nations have to do with the screening of a movie, Selma? At the UN, I'm here, of course, would like to welcome you on behalf of the United Nations and on behalf of the Secretary General, who's with us, the Secretary General of the United Nations. And the Deputy Secretary of the United Nations. So we are here in full force. We have also several representatives of the Office of the President of the General Assembly and of members of the diplomatic community, ambassadors and delegates, and colleagues, and of course, educators. We're very pleased to have many educators present with us today because our program that we have a program, Slavery Remembrance Program, as part of the Department of Public Information. It aims to provide and create material to help educators teach about the legacy of the transatlantic slave trade. We have a program that we observe in March every year to honor the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. It's still, even though it's been a few hundred years since that transatlantic slave was legally abolished, its legacy still continues, unfortunately in the form of racism, prejudices, and the story we're about to see tells a little bit about that, but also shows how through courage and how through determination, everybody can play a role in fighting that. And fighting racism and discrimination is our obligation, all of us, as individuals, as organizations. And I think we will have a panel to discuss these issues afterwards, so I don't want to delay the start of the film. We look forward to engaging with you afterwards in the discussion. Thank you very much.
Why did you choose to make this movie?
I'm jaw-dropped at the number of people here. It's always moving to see people come to see your work, but to know who all of you are in your communities and the great minds that you're guiding and nourishing. It's very moving to see everyone come out, so thank you for that. Why? There'd never been a film made about Dr. King, with Dr. King at the center. Never a major motion picture released by a studio in theaters in 50 years since these events happened. It's almost four and a half decades since his death, since his murder, and there's never been a major motion picture with King at the center. So I think that was reason enough to get it going. And yeah, you know, it was really just about trying to figure out the ways to achieve it by really understanding why it hadn't been done up until this point. But in some ways, I feel like the film wanted to be out right now, because for this film to meet this cultural moment seems to be, right on time.
First, I would like to reiterate our thanks to you for making such a great movie, which is very inspirational, as the Secretary General has said, but it's also very moving and I think very, very touching. Second, I think we should all remember and thank those very brave men and women who actually undertook that march, the first one, and suffered for it, and the results of their action was the Voting Act of 1965. It's interesting to note that even though the Emancipation Declaration was 1863, and these events were almost 100 years or more than 100 years, and still the legacy of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade still presented itself in the prejudices and discrimination that we have seen. The United Nations this year declared that this year is the first year of the decade, the International Decade for People of African Descent. And I think we also have a regular program. So this film is timely, and I think sharing and partnering in the screening and a discussion and maybe using it as an education tool to unfold and expose the ugly and shameful legacy of discrimination and racism that existed and it still exists today, unfortunately, in parts of the world, including here, unfortunately, that we can see in the world today, whether you're watching television screens or you're following on social media. Discrimination and racism exist, and we need to fight them in a way that we have seen non-violence can be much, much stronger than violence. The United Nations was built with the principles, basic principles, very similar, the opening words of the Charter, very similar to the American Constitution. Instead of we the people, it's we the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save future generations from the scourge of war. And it continues to build a better future for humanity. Then we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And those were adopted in 1945 and 1948. Still today, of course, we see that there is war, there is conflict, there are refugees, the highest number of refugees actually ever that the UN Refugee Agency looked after in 2014 was 2014, since the Second World War. So there's a lot of work to be done, and of course, a lot of that has to be about education and about mobilization and advocacy. And the more people see and learn from the legacy of people like Martin Luther King, and film is a very, very powerful medium for all of us to learn from and through. This film will do a lot more to educate about Martin Luther King than any lecture or any event that we can do about the transatlantic slave trade and its legacy. Last year, we were also very honored and very pleased to be able to do a number of film screenings at the United Nations. We screened 12 Years a Slave, we screened Belle, and a number of other films which we found through the reaction of the audience and our colleagues were much more powerful and effective in reaching younger generations, but also older ones. And I think this is one of the few reasons why we have decided to partner. We will continue this partnership. And at some point, as I said before you came, we wanted to have this screening at the United Nations. And at some point, maybe this year, maybe in March, when we unveil the permanent memorial for the victims of slavery in the transatlantic slave trade, which will be on the 25th of March this year. We hope that maybe we can, part of the celebration is to have this film screened at the UN again. But maybe we have to talk to Paramount Pictures, I don't know.
I say yes.
Yes.
I say yes, we'll be there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I guess my question would be for you, Ava. Why do you think this is such an exceptional teaching tool for the classroom?
Well, I think for me as an artist, it's for the teachers to determine. I can't say if it is. And I don't mean to pivot or be coy about it. It's really made from the heart, but from an artist's heart. I think there are many things that can be shared from the film with all kinds of people, particularly young people. But we make it and then we offer it as gift, and we hope that the effort is received in whatever way it can work best. So I'm anxious to hear from people, to hear if there are lessons to be learned, if there is a certain threshold of age where it might be more impactful, more effective. A big part of directing is listening, and so I'm anxious for the conversation that we'll have here tonight.
Would you like to share with the audience anything in regards to being able to film on location, be able to walk in the steps, to being able to learn anything about these iconic figures that have sort of leaped off the pages of the history books and that you have encapsulated so well in this film?
Well, really, our goal with this film, my personal mission was to deconstruct heroes. I feel that King has been encased in marble in many ways. He is a stamp, a street name, a holiday, a speech, and not a living, breathing human being who walked among us less than 50 years ago, who did great things. And so, really it was trying to kind of deconstruct all of these kind of tropes of King and really try to get underneath him, to really illuminate the fact that he was a human being. He was a brother from Atlanta who was the son of a very charismatic man, Daddy King, they called him, as many of you know. And Daddy King was the center of attention. He was a forceful presence in Atlanta. And when King went to Boston and met his sister, Coretta, who was older than him, in fact, I always love that tidbit, a little bit older than him. Most people don't know that. They moved to Alabama in a way to get away from the shadow of his father and be his own man. And within months of arriving, he swept up in history with the Montgomery bus boycotts. And so taking that history and instead of just saying, yes, King went to Boston University and he then went to Alabama and the bus boycotts began, just the way I just told you the story, gave you a sense of the person. And that's what we were trying to do in each and every frame, a sense of the person. Because I think if you see King as a man and not a myth and not a mountaintop speech and not all of the things that we've constructed about him, if you see him as a man, and it allows his greatness to be closer to us and let us feel that we can touch that greatness and be that great. And so that was really just the very foundational goal of all of our efforts aesthetically and narratively as we approach the frames. really worked with the actors and tried to recreate as best we could, approximate the spirit of what it felt like to be there. You know, when you're making a historical drama, it is drama. You know what I mean? It's not fact. It's fiction. And so we try to collapse 13 years into 120 minutes. We tried to collapse characters that were larger than life. Some of the most, I've met some of these people who are still living, some of the most fascinating, brilliant minds you'll ever meet that get just a bit of screen time, just as a tip of the hat to say, look, you were there and your name will be said on celluloid here. But, you know, it's never going to be the full picture, and that's where you come in. That's where the educators come in to fill in those blanks. And the hope is that this is a jumping off point, and that this triggers, curiosity to know more.
There are educator materials that have been created to support this film that will be distributed by Paramount Pictures that are actually on the Zion ED, and that will have not only the history that will encompass the story, but also includes the film clips, and also includes the interviews, and also includes interviews with the actors and the ability to be able to sort of speak to them directly about what they felt was most important about being able to be in this film and playing these iconic roles and what they learned about it coming out of it. So I guess for me, I will ask the question, and I want to open up, if I can quickly open up onto the audience. What is it that you did not know about these wonderful people? After did you realize this shifted for you in regards to after the film as opposed to what you came into it believing about them?
But yeah, I was an African American studies major at UCLA. That's right. And so, I definitely knew my movement history, but I think I still, I always kept a bit of a, I had some judgment about nonviolent theory. And because I'd never studied the many layers of nonviolent theory in the way that I had to here. I think when I studied the history for the first time in college, it was more about nonviolent practice and education and execution, but I really didn't dive deep into the theory. And so it's fascinating. I tried to weave it through as much as I can in the film, but that's just something that I invite that distinction to be made with students or with anyone kind of studying this era. It's one thing to say, hands behind the head, go limp, the tactics, but the strategy behind it and the theory behind it. One of the things that I had always kind of just held to be the ultimate truth about the reason why Dr. King and others espoused nonviolence was that it was very faith-based. They were Christian, and so you don't hit back, and that's just such a reduction of the reasons why so many different people, folks who were not people of faith, why they embraced nonviolent theory. And so that distinction was one of the gifts of exploring and researching this, and something that I'm really excited for people to delve into.
I hope that you all walked out of here with full appreciation of how in depth this movement actually was, and how much that 5-day journey required a lot of logistics. It was not something as simplistic that was executed. I hope you pay attention, and we can teach our students about the fact that they had to travel, that they had very restrictive parameters about where they could travel, how many people could travel, what route they could travel, where they could stay. These movements that are sort of just linchpinned and quickly, discussed on the page of our history book have entire logistical movements of sheer brilliance that most people do not really understand or have not delved back into history. And I think you did very well with being able to display that. And this was not something that just was sort of a willy-nilly, let's just go down there and march across the bridge.
Well, I think that's exactly right. And the big thing about it is that there was strategy. You were talking about execution, and that was, the brilliant stories about that we weren't able to include. But just the strategy, the idea that they all are, in the living room, talking about what to do next, and the different ideas that this was not a monolithic group. I mean, everyone had a different idea. Everyone was brilliant. Any of those people from the band of brothers and sisters around King could have been King. Right. The reason he was King is because he was the most brilliant speaker you'd ever heard. He had a charisma more than any. They were all brilliant minds. And so the idea that that this was a strategic endeavor, and that it was approached with like in a war room of sorts, but the war was with their own bodies, and to giving that up for the movement. Those are some ideas that I think have, as I've traveled around the country, have surprised people. I think in some ways we think, oh, they marched, they just stepped out on the street and started marching, not really thinking about, just the tactical effort that it was.
Thank you so much for bringing to life the story that you brought to us. I guess I was blessed because in watching that movie, I saw people that I knew, that I worked with. As a matter of fact, having started the civil rights movement as a teenager, I was fortunate in ending up being the national chairman of the youth and college chapters of the NAACP, and in 1956 was at a convention and met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. when he was came to speak to the NAACP. He was 26 years old. It was his first time ever being able to speak before the NAACP, and as a teaching tool again. Dr. King was not welcomed by the older leaders of the civil rights movement at that time. As a matter of fact, in California at the convention, they said that you were not going to speak here. The older one said it. And so we had a youth movement, a college chapter, college members of the NAACP got together and told Roy Wilkins and others that if Dr. King doesn't speak here, then no one else can speak here. That was one of our first movements, and Dr. King spoke there. And when I watched your movie, I saw people like Barry Rustin, whom I worked with, I met, and people like that. Dr. King, who I had great fortune of meeting, and it's a tool for me because it was mentioned that I was the author of the Amistad legislation in New Jersey, which requires that the contributions that African Americans have made to develop this country be taught to everybody, and not just in February, by the way, and not just in black neighborhoods, by the way, but every student, black, white, must know that the contributions that we have made, you see. So one of the things that helped me to move that legislation was a photograph was taken when Dr. King spoke at the convention. In the photograph is Bill Payne helping him down the stairs. Medgar Evers is in that picture as well. So when I was in the state legislature in New Jersey, I used that picture and I passed it around for everyone to see that picture. And I said the reason why I fight for this, the reason why I fight against racial profiling is because people in that picture gave their lives. People that I knew personally gave their lives for what they believed in, and there was nothing that would keep me from fighting for the country we did. That's why we did it. Dr. King was one that I think we need to know about so much more. And this tool brings him to life. It brings for our young people, as I say, black and white throughout the country, throughout the year, not just the short response. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
First, I want to say I love the movie. It brought out every emotion. I was cheering, I was crying, I was laughing. And one of the things that is rarely mentioned, even though it's almost hush, hush, you brought out in the movie, and that was the part about the secrecy of Martin possibly cheating on Coretta Scott King. And I was just wondering if you got a lot of negative feedback about putting that in the movie, and if so, what was that like?
We were not sanctioned by the estate. We were independent filmmakers. The family, the estate, the intellectual property, all of that was not in play with our storytelling. And so we were free to explore wherever the story took us. And during the months of the Selma campaign, a tape did arrive to the King home. It had actually been sent months before, but it had gone to the SCLC offices, and it hadn't gotten to Coretta in a box in her house until during the Selma marches. She speaks about it, she writes about it in her autobiography. And so, yes, I mean, it happened. And so we take our imaginations into that room, and I think about, what did she say? What did he say? You know, there are other filmmakers that might want to deal with that subject matter in maybe a more salacious way. They may want to see the act. They may want to see him with another woman if that happened, or how the tape was made is a nicer way to say it. My interest was in, what'd your wife say when you got home? And so maybe it's because I'm a woman filmmaker, I don't know. I think it does speak to the fact that we need diverse voices behind the camera, because that's a scene that gives you an example of the different ways that different filmmakers would approach that subject matter. And for me, it was important to approach it within the context of his marriage. to continue with our mission to humanize him and let him be free of the myth that he's been trapped in.
For me, the most emotional part was the bridge scene. I felt myself almost unable to breathe, to borrow that hashtag. But I'm wondering, and watching the movie over, when you watch the final piece, what was the most powerful piece for you? Because I felt the movie to be emotional throughout, but I'm wondering what was the most powerful scene for you?
The scene for me, and I worked on the script for the scene, wrote the scene, cast the actors, decided what they were going to wear, picked the locations, blocked the scene, shot the scene, edited the scene, added the music to the scene. But every time I see Lee and King in that morgue, I can't do it. And each step of the way, that was the scene that just, if I'm really stopping, I watch that scene, it really is difficult for me to watch. That whole sequence, from the moment the family runs into the cafe, to the moment he says, "It's okay, Mama," and he puts his hand. That always gets me, puts his hand, "It's okay." And he, read, act like you're reading. Act like you're gonna order. All the way through the rest of that sequence to Lee in the morgue. These were real people. All of the named people in the film, one thing that I'm very proud of, everyone who's named in the film is a real person. There are no composite characters. Down to Richie Jean Jackson, the woman who makes them breakfast when she walks into their house and takes care of them. Richie Jean and Sullivan Jackson were a prominent couple in Selma. Each and every named person in this film is a real person with their own really fascinating story. But yes, to answer your question, that's my scene.
Last week I had the privilege, I was in Israel, visiting with Selma Q A, who's a Palestinian from Ramallah, who co-founded Combatants for Peace, along with Israeli counterparts. And I was watching this film, and I was thinking, you've created such a phenomenal tool to visualize what nonviolent, peaceful protest looks like. And the other aspect, I was thinking about how it showed in the marches how multiple generations of people who, felt like they might not have had the dignity could participate as well with the young people. So I was wondering for both of you, what are your hopes for this to change the world?
I think the film is an example of what can be done with determination, courage, and a belief in a just cause. And I think this was a just cause, we not disagree on that. And I think there have been, and there are many other non-violent movements, but they haven't all been necessarily as successful. I mean, Gandhi was one, and we can all recall that one. And I think when you mentioned, and we have also shown and seen films at the UN about Palestine, Israel. Budrus is an example of the people of a village that actually went against the wall that was coming, and they were doing it peacefully and non-violently. And I think maybe they were inspired by a story and the tradition of non-violence. Maybe they have heard about it, but I think this film would give more than other people and maybe in other parts of the world. I mean, today we saw the exact opposite of non-violence. We saw two gunmen go into a magazine, a satirical magazine in France, in Paris, and kill 11, 12 people. And that kind of violence and terrorism does not actually help the cause. It hurts whichever cause. There's no cause that can justify terrorism and violence. If anything, this inspires. That causes people to be sick. And I think that can change, hopefully will change people's perspective of what can be achieved through violence or non-violence.
Thank you for coming out.